So our final speaker needs no introduction, but he's getting one anyway. Tom Eastman is a developer, systems engineer, and security consultant from New Zealand, and he's going to show us how to use Python, Django, and ruthlessness to protect people from harassment. Please make Tom feel welcome.
Hello. This is a talk about a side project, and I have a really poor track record with side projects. This talk is about a side project that actually has made it a little bit further than the idea stage for once, but I kind of need to say up front that not much further. So yeah, but my talk's actually only peripherally about the project. You can kind of take it or leave it. What I'm really here to say is, if you think you actually have a skill set that you could use to protect somebody, you have a moral obligation to do so. That's it. I mean, I've got other stuff I'm going to say tonight, but that's all you need to write down. And look, that might be a massive ethical and philosophical oversimplification, but it's a better direction in which to be wrong than many other choices that you might be able to make. So who uses Twitter a lot? You have my condolences. In quite a lot of ways, Twitter seems like it was designed from the ground up to be the perfect tool for harassment. Everything is public by default. People broadcast directly to their followers, and people with a lot of followers can use them as a private army. They can use them as ammunition. And Twitter was basically designed to be the perfect platform for dogpiling. And dogpiling is when one user basically uses their followers to attack some other user, usually just for expressing their opinions. It's an emergent property that's fundamental to how Twitter was designed. If you're on there, you already know how ugly this can get. And it happens to me like a little bit, but not much, and that's because I'm a middle-class educated white guy in tech, and I have a profile picture of myself standing behind a podium with a fancy suit jacket on, stroking my beard like intellectually. I have the privilege of my existence on Twitter not being questioned every day. But if you're a woman or a member of any marginalized group, Twitter can just be like a sea of nightmares. Twitter provides like a few really blunt, flawed mechanisms to try to deal with harassers. You can set your Twitter profile to private, and that kind of locks it down, but it also has the result of locking you out of the public conversations that you might have wanted to be a part of. And you can block or mute users. Blocking individual users doesn't do you any good if there are people stirring crowds of users to attack you. It's the same problem for muting users, but it's even worse because if you mute users, they just start harassing everyone who replies to any tweet that you ever make. And you don't see it. You don't realize that it's happening anymore because you have successfully muted them. Twitter has a report user and sort of report tweet functionality these days, and they're beyond useless. They're actually harmful. They've become tools for organized harassment just as much as tools to protect from it. Nowadays, people will, instead of organizing their followers to attack you, they'll organize their followers to report you. And then you get suspended. And Twitter's not going to fix any of this. Because here's the thing. This toxic model of interaction is great for engagement. And engagement, eyeballs on screen, and thus eyeballs on promoted tweets, is the only metric Twitter optimizes for. You've heard this phrase, right? If you're not paying for the product, you are the product. You've probably all heard this before. And you already knew this about social media platforms, right? They're free because they collect and harvest information about you that they use for targeted advertising. You already know this. And you say you mind a little, you say it annoys you, but really you don't mind because actually otherwise you wouldn't be on there. But that's because you think that you're a product, like how a nice car is a product, or a professional consultant is a product, but you're not. To these companies, you're the product like how a caged battery hen is the product. And it might not have been so bad still if your best interests aligned with theirs, but they don't. They're just here for the eggs, and your well-being, physical or emotional, is not among the metrics that they are optimizing for. That's not where their money's made. So it's either quit or do something about it yourself. if you want something better and if you want to remain on this platform and remain a part of this big conversation while still actually having the ability to draw some boundaries and take some power back in terms of how people interact with you, you're going to have to do it yourself. Blocking individual users one at a time does not scale when someone's being attacked by a mob. One very successful tool that's been around for a few years that solves some of this problem is called Block Together, and it's a site where like-minded people can form lists of accounts and people can subscribe to block everyone on that list. And it first gained prominence sort of around the Gamergate era, and it's still a very useful tool in this vein. It's a pretty good idea, it's done well, but it depends on someone having done the work of identifying miscreants kind of ahead of time. So now we come to what I've been playing with for the last little while. There were two things that I wanted, and that I kind of waited in vain for Twitter to get around to implementing themselves. But they won't. Twitter's never provided the means to temporarily block or mute someone. You can't click a button and say, like, mute someone for a week or block someone for a month. You'd have to remember to unblock them later yourself. And what I wanted was something more like a timeout. I wanted something that I could use with more ruthlessness. I could go, yeah, I don't want to hear from you for like a month. You can go away and cool down, right? You can cut off an unpleasant interaction right away without it feeling like a permanent severance or something. And Twitter actually understands the power of temporary blocks to encourage your use of a safety feature, right? Hilariously, they'll implement it so that nerds can protect themselves from movie spoilers, but not so that you can protect yourself from Nazis. And then the second thing that I thought we needed was, or something that I wanted to provide at least, was a way to protect yourself against the dog pile, right? If you need to block a person who's attacking you, you probably actually need to block all their followers as well. At least for a while. Just shut them down. So that's what I decided to build. I decided to build a tool that you can use that will allow you to click a single button and mute or block a harasser and all their followers for a time period. 6 weeks, 12 weeks, 30 weeks, you know, just goodbye. Put them in a timeout, let them cool off, let them find something else to do with their time. I have this theory, you can ask me about it later, which is if you ever have to block someone on Twitter, it's because both you and them agree that your time is more valuable than their time. Because they wouldn't be tweeting at you until you had to block them, unless they decided that was the best use of their time. So that's the project. And for the rest of this talk, I'm just going to take you through what I think have been some of the interesting parts of taking what is honestly actually a pretty simple idea and turning it into a Django app. So I was going to spend some time talking about the technical details of how it was built, but it is just a Django project, and you can read it for yourselves. So at its core, it actually really is a very simple idea. Can everyone read this code at the back? Cool. This is the whole thing. Like this is the business logic of more or less what I just described. This code here just grabs three things. It does three things. It grabs your credentials, your Twitter API credentials. It iterates through each page of an account's followers, and it sends a block request to every numeric ID received per page. Each page of followers is about 5,000. And it sleeps when it hits Twitter's rate limit. So it'll run for a while, it'll hit a rate limit, it'll just sleep. That's just a function of the funky little Python Twitter library, which is on PyPI. Pretty straightforward, right? The whole business logic of my idea in one screen of code. So what does it take to take an idea this simple, something that's expressible on one slide, and turn it into a web app that people can actually use? Can everyone read the code at the back? It's not actually a surprise to anyone in the room, right? Like Django can't shield you from how complicated even the simplest web application needs to be just to do the basics, right? So rather than take you through the whole code base, I just wanted to sort of talk a little bit about why it becomes so much more complicated. And then celery. At least for a tool like this, all the useful work that this tool does, all the useful work that Secateur does, happens somewhere other than in a web view. So in the script I showed you before, the work was done in a single loop, and it was blocking, and it could take a long time just sending all the API calls sequentially. I need something like this to work fast for lots of users, regardless of how slow the API is or how restrictive Twitter's rate limiting can be. So I built it as a bunch of asynchronous celery tasks, which for the most part each handle one interaction with the Twitter API. So you end up with a celery task that blocks the user, a celery task that unblocks the user, a celery task that iterates through one page of results from retrieving a list from Twitter, and that could be like a list of followers or a block list or and then once you have all of those as separate tasks, they can be farmed out to your celery workers and they can just scale out. And the complexity in something like this is actually just in orchestrating and scheduling those tasks, because every time you receive a page of 5,000 followers, you need to create 5,000 more tasks, and you can hit a Twitter rate limit. All of the Twitter rate limits are sort of in 15-minute windows, so then you need to have some kind of exponentially weighted back-off period where it'll farm out those tasks to random 15-minute windows scheduled down the way so that it's still responsive when you want to do something in a hurry, but won't just over-congest or won't just DOS the system, right? And that all adds up to code. And then there's like my own personal Achilles heel, which is user interfaces. I'm terrible at them. If you've already tried to pull it up, you've seen it's a disgusting, crappy Hello World style bootstrap thing. It's not my strong point. I'm a better Python coder than an HTML coder. Unfortunately, people actually do need to be able to log in, and they need to actually do the thing, and they need to be able to log out again, and then disconnect entirely if they want to have nothing to do with the app. And you also, very valuable lesson, the difference between a little shell script and a web app, the guardrails. So you don't want to allow people to accidentally block their own users, their own followers. You want to make sure that what they ask of the system is sort of finite and achievable. You don't want them to try and block all the followers of an account with 107 million people. That can take a long time. You don't want someone to try and block all of Twitter, even if you sympathize. Even simple ideas that you can convey as a screen full of code end up being pretty complex once you try and build it for any kind of real world. And complexity means that there's more stuff that can go wrong. And it means that there might be more stuff that's exploitable by attackers. So this would be a problem in any web app, even toy side projects. But this toy side project is intended for use by people who are vulnerable, right? And people who are already being attacked. So if they're hoping that something like this will protect them, then first and foremost, it better not actually expose them to more harm. So I'm going to talk a little bit about threat modeling. And we're just going to be informal about this. I was going to have a slide with like the Wikipedia definition of threat modeling in it, like a high school essay. But what I'm talking about here is the exercise of brainstorming and planning out as much as you can about like who might be trying to attack your project and what resources they might have at their disposal, how they might go about it, and most importantly, like what would happen next. And you do this because you need to decide, given the trade-offs, what the next most important thing you can do to keep people safe. It's nothing to do with trying to make something perfectly secure. That doesn't happen. It doesn't exist. So you have to work out for yourself, what is the next best thing that I can do? So who might try to attack my code? The first obvious choice is everyone, right? The sort of background radiation that everyone has to deal with on the internet, whole internet scans, bots, just scripted things scanning wide swaths of the internet looking for low-hanging fruit. And to be honest, if you're using Django, and if you're using up-to-date libraries, if your app is behind SSL, and you don't turn on debug mode, you're actually already in pretty decent shape here. So people specifically targeting Secator would be far more dangerous. People might choose to attack it specifically because they're angry about what it does, or they're angry about who's using it. And they might have a lot of time at their disposal, and they can clone the repository, and they can see how it works. They can investigate my dependencies and go looking for vulnerabilities in them. It's far scarier. And then the last group that might be a specific threat, especially right now, is you guys. Everyone here knows Python and Django. You might have already cloned the GitHub repository. You're bored, and you know that the maintainer is busy. Thankfully, I'm sure you're all wonderful, right? Right. Okay, and you need to know why what they would be trying to get when they do it. What does a tool like Secateur have that an attacker would want? Most of what it stores in its database is publicly extractable from the Twitter API anyway. It's like Twitter user profiles and who follows who and a couple other bits and pieces. There is some private stuff in there. There's like the list of who someone is blocking and the list of who someone is muting. That stuff is not publicly extractable from any API. You can only do that as the specific user. But most importantly, what Secateur has is OAuth credentials. And this is terrifying, because if an attacker can obtain a user's credentials, a user's OAuth tokens, along with the global credentials that you use to access the Twitter API, then they can do anything that Secateur can do with that account. And Twitter does not have fine-grained control over application privileges. There are 3 levels. There's basically read-only, almost everything, and everything. And Secateur to block users requires the almost everything level. Can you read that? So the almost everything level is read tweets, see who you follow new people, update your profile, and post tweets for you. And it doesn't say so here, but it can also send DMs. The read-write mode can send DMs. The only difference between the almost everything mode and the everything mode is the everything mode lets you read the DMs. I haven't actually tried this yet. I haven't actually tried these privileges to read my own DMs, but yes, as you were kind of pointing at, it seems contradictory. Like this screen, which is the App Connect screen, contradicts the API documentation. So I haven't actually confirmed which one it is. I'll do that and get back to you, actually, because, yeah. And so if this freaks you out, now is the perfect time to go to your Twitter settings page and look at all the apps to which you've already granted all these privileges. Have you ever used Instagram to post a photo to Twitter? Then Instagram can send DMs as you if it wanted to your friends. You're welcome. Okay, this is just a snippet of the code from the code base. So if you were trying to get a hold of these credentials, you need 4 things. You need the global variables, which are the consumer key and the consumer secret. And then you also need an individual user's OAuth token and OAuth token secret. And we're going to game out a little bit how you would go about trying to get a hold of these. So we'll start with the global keys. They're delivered to the application the way I've configured it, by environment variables by Docker. So it's sort of a 12-factor app style thing. What would be the route that an attacker would take to try and get these credentials? Hardest to easiest. The hardest one is probably just achieve remote code exec directly against the Django app, right? If you can exploit the Python code and somehow execute Python code, then you can just ask for the settings and you're done, right? Like, that's the worst case scenario. I imagine that's difficult. Can someone actually tell me if Django has ever had remote code exec vulnerabilities? It has in the past?
Yes, I think 1 or 2.
Yeah, okay. It's rare. It's rare, but yeah, okay, it's not unheard of. It's unlikely. You'd be better off trying to compromise the host instance. But actually, the way I've configured this, even if you did, you'd probably need to find a way to escalate your privileges to root or maybe execute a Docker escape before you could get at these variables. And a Docker escape is also not unheard of, but it's non-trivial. I need to watch Sarah Young's talk, actually. I missed that. Or if you can access them as me and get a hold of my SSH key, then you can get a hold of them. That's sort of a weak link there. And those are the sort of hard ways of getting about it, but it'd be a whole lot easier if I accidentally turned on debug mode. This is just a reminder to everyone about good hygiene, because even though Django's error pages and stack trace pages do filter out settings with names like key or password or secret. They sort of star those out and censor them. But those variables will still show up in stack traces. So you can't rely on that. Just don't allow debug mode to ever be turned onable on a production instance. But actually, the lowest hanging fruit is my own Twitter account, because you have to tie API credentials to a Twitter account. And if you can get a hold of them by stealing my browser cookies — where's Alex, by the way? Then you can just go straight to developer.twitter.com and just grab them, right? Now, hopefully that actually wouldn't be easy either, because my Twitter password and my password manager password, they're non-guessable. Both are using multi-factor authentication. Nevertheless, from gaming out a little exercise like this, you can tell that the most important next security step for an app like this is to create a new Twitter account for the sole purpose of administering the app, and make sure that the developer credentials are tied to that, and keep it off my day-to-day Twitter account and keep it off my day-to-day devices. It shouldn't be on here, shouldn't be on my phone. Yeah, you'll have to keep that secret somewhere else. And then the other half of the credentials you'd need are the user-specific OAuth token and secret. They're stored in a Django model in plain text, because they have to be readable back out in plain text. So you could paper over that with encryption in the database, but then, yeah. The app that I'm using for the Twitter Federation stuff is Python Social Auth, which is fantastic. I highly recommend it. By default, irritatingly, it doesn't obfuscate or treat those tokens as sensitive. They're just kind of right there in the Django admin model. So one of the things that I did to just sort of make that a little bit harder is monkey patch the admin section just to exclude that field. So that, at least, without it being easily on display in the admin section, you're back to having to compromise the app itself again, right? Or get Python code exec somehow. So you're back to sort of the hard case. Django admin access on a tool like this, you could do some damage, but at least now you're going to have to do more work to get what you might really have been after. So with all that said, where does it leave a threat model like this? By the standards of web apps, I think I've done okay. Like I think it's not too bad. I'm better at securing things than I am making UIs for them. But if someone needs a tool like this, it's because they've already been harassed, right? And it would be unethical for me to tell anyone that they simply have to trust me in order to use it. So the final crucial element for anything like this, if you're actually going to put the users of a system like this ahead of your own interests, is to open source it. That wasn't actually a given. I'm at an open source conference, but this was the decision I only made recently. I was gonna keep this to myself, like share it with people, but I actually thought I could monetize this a little bit. I could at least get, like coffee, whatever it is, the thing, like $1 donation here or there to kind of just pay for the server costs or something. But there's no moral argument for putting someone's protection behind a paywall and saying they have to trust you and if they're going to use it. So if I'm really trying to be on the side of anyone who needs a tool like this, I'm totally obliged to make sure that they're not forced to trust me in order to use it. Yeah, because basically in the end, if you think you have a skill you could use to protect someone, you have a moral obligation to do it. That's my talk. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Tom.